Thanks. So as Tony said, Mac's been multi-user for a long time. I think the first time Apple added multi-user was macOS 9, which wasn't really true multi-user, but just a sort of glorified UI hack. But once macOS 10 came along, multi-user became a reality, which was great because before that, trying to manage labs where it didn't clear the preferences every time someone used the machine used to be a nightmare. Anyway, so let's get going. So that's the agenda for today. Just a few background things, and talk about the challenges of multi-user machines, and then the various areas where we come up with solutions to handle the sort of things that multi-user Macs require. So background. So this is my environment at UNSW. We've got 470 multi-user machines, mostly in the labs. We've obviously got way more single-user machines, and those are all one-to-one machines for staff. We have a few postgraduates that also have single-user machines, but we treat those as sort of staff. The big thing is we have like 320 applications we manage and mostly patch. And our main management tools are Apple School Manager, Jamf Pro, and Auto Packager. There's me and one other engineer, and then we have 4 support people that specialise in Apple. The rest of them are all Windows people. And being a university that has a 3-term year as opposed to a 2-semester year means we have very little downtime. There's literally December, January, and then a couple of weeks in between each term, and that's it. So we don't have a great amount of time to mess with the system and break things, which is a shame because that's the fun bit. So talking about challenges, multi-user machines are definitely not zero-touch. Everybody talks about zero-touch IT. Well, multi-user machines are very labour-intensive if you can't automate things. Basically, IT has to do everything. So, as I said, users don't set up their own machines, and they're typically in labs. We typically have about 25 machines in a lab. We rebuild them once a year. We used to do it more often, but we just don't have time now. The main reason for that is our application stacks change quite between teaching semesters sometimes, and it's sometimes easier just to blow the machine away and reinstall everything that it is to try and get some of the old software off. But things have certainly improved in the last 5 or so years. The requirement to rebuild constantly is not a problem. We typically do it at the start of the year when it comes to putting the new major version of the OS on. And typically we try and replace our labs every 4 years. If it gets longer than that, they start to become unreliable. And also, we've had faculties in the past that like to keep their machines until they basically blow up, and then we can't run the latest OS on them, and that means management becomes a nightmare as well. The second major thing about shared machines is the users aren't admins. So, all the apps and all the OS updates have to be done for them. Typically, you want to try and do it, out of hours so it's not disruptive, but that's not always possible depending on what system you're using for deploying apps and patching them. There's also issues with things like apps that won't install nicely when no one's logged in, because typically the Mac sits at the login window unless someone's using it, so that can be a challenge. And then because they're not admin, there are some apps that won't even run if you're not an admin user, so that can become a challenge as well. The other thing about shared machines is users move between machines. So, you have to reconfigure their apps every time they move. Typically their data needs to be stored somewhere external so they can get to it. Typical cloud syncing applications don't sync when you're not logged in. So the problem is the user either has to wait for the stuff to sync before they log out, or they forget and then they're missing their files. And of course, because their hard drives are local to the machine, the drives fill up, so you have to work out a system for removing old home folders and accounts. Likewise, with labs, we have to chain everything down because it's not locked in someone's office or in a secure workspace. So that's a problem, and that means we can't use the bundled Apple keyboards and mice. We have to go out and buy third-party wired ones, and then crimp security cables to everything and stuff like that. So that actually adds quite a bit of money to the cost actually, and a lot more time to actually set up a machine, because typically You might try, typically a keyboard's screwed after 4 years as well, so you have to replace all of those just as well. When we leased machines, of course, we had to keep all the Apple keyboards and stuff for when they went back to leasing, but luckily we don't do that anymore. And then also, if you've got shared machines that you need to have on Wi-Fi, that can be challenging as well, especially in an enterprise where, it's either certificate based or per user authenticated to getting on the Wi-Fi. And that, the last thing you want is for another user to log in using the previous person's credentials on the Wi-Fi, especially if they get up to trouble. And then software licensing and settings, that's fun and games as well. Some apps and settings are fleet-wide, so they're not too difficult, but you get ones that are specialized per computer or per user, or even worse, per user and per computer, and those are really nasty. So the trick is to automate everything, or as much as you can, because there's just not enough time to manually run around machines in labs. So the first area is automated setup. A sort of goal is for the staff to basically put the machine on the desk, plug in the Ethernet, plug in the power, turn it on and walk away. Now, we don't quite achieve that, but we get close. So the first thing is we're still binding our shared machines to Active Directory. Hopefully that will change with Apple's new sort of shared Platform SSO stuff coming along, but I suspect that'll probably be another year before it's stable. The main reasons why we're binding to AD are two things. So we have the user accounts for everybody in the cloud, effectively, in AD, so they can just simply log in with the university credentials. The other thing is we use it for scoping what apps get put on the machines. Depending on which OU the machine is located in an AD, we can then use smart groups based on that value using an extension attribute to decide, this class gets these apps versus those ones. And of course you can use the hierarchy in AD to do common apps for different groups and stuff as well. And then we also have the machines in Apple School Manager, so they're, old DEP, what is it, automated device enrollment as it now is. So basically when you turn on the machine, it knows to go to Jamf and enroll. So in Jamf we use pre-stages. We have different ones for labs and staff, so we can easily differentiate between the two. They're set to all auto advance through setup assistant, so as long as the machine's turned on and connected to Ethernet, you don't have to be there to click all the buttons through setup assistant. It'll automatically enroll in Jamf Pro, bind to AD, and then just be at the login window where everything else happens after that. We have started to use the minimum OS version, because a lot of Macs tend to come with older versions of the OS out of the box, especially if it's a lab spare or something you've had sitting around for a while. So it's really good that you can now set a minimum OS and the machine will just automatically upgrade at enrollment time to that particular version. Likewise, we use the pre-stage for setting the language and region, and we use recovery lock on the lab machines, so basically users can't pop into recovery and bypass SIP and all the other security features. And then we're still having to rely on things like scripts to set computer names and set time zones, because Apple hasn't given us a config profile for doing those. The biggest part after you've got the OS on the machine is getting the apps on and getting them up to date. As I said, we try and automate this as much as possible and schedule things after hours. Now we use 4 sort of different application packaging, if you call it, methods, from least to most work. Jamf app catalog is the easiest. Basically, if it's in their catalog, you can basically just tick a box and it'll deploy the app to the machine, and you can configure it so if an app's an update's available, it can just deploy it. The next easiest one to do is the App Store, but unfortunately, not many Mac apps are in there, but that's fairly simple to do as well. And then for those apps that someone else hasn't packaged for you or have updates regularly, we try and use auto package. And that's a system where it basically goes out onto the internet once a day looking for updates for the list of apps you've got. It'll download the app, repackage it if it needs to, and then upload it automatically to your Jamf Pro, and then update the policies and patch policies to deploy or update the app. And then the last one, of course, is when you have to manually package something. So that's to recap on Jamf Catalog. We have 60 apps that we use that for. I mean, the best one in that lot is the Adobe suite. So instead of having to go into Adobe's admin console and download the installers for all their apps and their license keys and everything else, you can basically just tick the box in Jamf Pro and have it install which Adobe apps you want. You don't have to install all of them. It's nice that you can pick and choose which ones. Most of these systems have what we call a deadline. So when it comes to updates, you can just say, well, if the update comes out today, make sure it's installed in, between 2 or X number of days. And so, the user will get warnings until the deadline, and then it'll force quit the app and install it. So that's good because, some people like to leave some apps open all the time, and that can be a problem because they never get patched. Likewise, as I said, for VPP, there's only a few. It's mainly the Apple apps, the Garage Bands and the Keynotes and stuff. And there's current issues with that. They don't patch if they're still running. I think Apple's fixing that in macOS 26, but I'm not 100% sure. As I said, with Auto Package, that's mainly our audio apps, our CAD apps and stuff like that. So there's quite a few of those. Similar system, but what we can control is what time Auto Package actually goes and does the checking for the update. So once it's gone through the list and generated them, if you do it after hours, there's the good chance that all the apps will get deployed to the machines after hours as well. But it's not guaranteed. And then the bulk of our packages are still manual. And that's not just apps, it's also settings and printer drivers, and again, those are deployed by policies and install policies. The next section is application settings and licenses. Now, if every app supported config profiles, be happy, but unfortunately a lot of them don't, especially for the licensing portion. We have 260 config profiles, which is a lot. I mean, a lot of those are the new Jamf compliance benchmark stuff, because it generates a different set of the benchmark config profiles for each version of macOS. But even after that, we have a lot of them for the privacy policy stuff and things like that. Now, as well as using config profiles, we also deploy settings via packages. There's a little thing called the user template that exists on the Mac, so you can copy files into that via a package, and so when the new user logs in, those settings also get copied to their home folder when it's created. The big downside is you can't allow that to get too big, otherwise it takes forever to log in the first time on that machine. So we try and do tricks with symbolic links and stuff, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The other thing is not all apps stick their settings in home folders or in library preferences. So we have other packages that basically have to install files in all sorts of wacky locations. And so the fun and games there is you've got to find these things first, and there's good support forums about some apps, but if you get a new one or one that's not commonly used, it can take you quite a while to figure out where those files are, and if in fact you can actually just copy them. Sometimes you have to modify them on the fly. That's where scripts come in. So we've got scripts that to deploy settings and licenses. Some of them get installed just after the package gets installed. Other ones you have to be logged in. So when the first user logs in after it's been installed, then it has to run once. Other ones require it to be run every time a user logs in. So, I mean, it does slow down login, but typically these things are pretty quick, so it's not too much of a problem. A lot of apps have also moved to, in-app sign-ins for licensing, like the Adobe apps just tie in with our, Entra ID / Azure AD. So that's actually good for us because we don't actually have to do any configuration. It's just the user is required to do it. And other apps, especially some of the free CAD apps and stuff, the user just has to simply hop onto their site and register, and then they get a free license. So again, that's something the user has to do and not something we can do for them. The next thing is schedule OS updates. this has been really challenging ever since macOS 11. Once upon a time, you could force an OS update on a Mac by running a command called software update in a script, but Apple's sort of broken that over the years intentionally because it was, it wasn't secure enough, especially on the Apple Silicon machines. So since macOS 11, software updates have been more of a challenge. We also find that Apple loves to break the software update mechanism every OS release in the dot releases. So you'll get a brand new version of macOS, and for the first or second dot release, the installs through the MDM will work marvelously, and then Apple will fiddle with something, and then by dot 3 or dot 4, half your fleet won't update, and you've got to start asking people to manually run around to do it. So that's not cool. I mean, whether macOS 26 will be any better or not, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So since the DDM command came out a few years ago, we find that that's more reliable and a lot more user-friendly than the old MDM commands used to be. So we use the download and schedule install. So we set a deadline for the user to update once we've decided an update's going to happen. And then we typically give them between 2 to 5 days to actually install it. And then if they haven't, then because they'll get prompted. And if they haven't by that point, then Apple should just trigger the update automatically. That'll give them another hour if they're not logged in. Obviously the labs aren't logged in, and we try and schedule it for late at night. So hope magically when we come back in on Monday morning, hope most of the labs are updated. And that has happened sometimes, but not all the time. In 15.4, Apple managed to break the deadline system, that if you weren't logged in, the deadline wouldn't apply. And so that caused all havoc when the students logged into the labs the next mornings, and then were getting rebooted an hour after they'd started class. So yeah, that took Apple 2 dot releases to fix that. So that wasn't fixed till 15.6. So it's never smooth sailing. Likewise, we schedule staff for 7 a.m. That's both one-to-one and shared staff, and we find that seems to be a reasonable time. So basically, if they've ignored update the messages for X number of days, then the next morning it's just going to happen before typically they start work. And if their machine's not online, it'll just happen once they power up or log into their machine. Just power on their machine or open it from sleep. But they will get that hour's grace period, so it's not like it just happens instantly. Now, in terms of reliability, we find we can get to about 75% patch rate with the fleet when we're using that mechanism. For macOS 14, it's even buggier, so we only ever get to about 40% because not all of our fleet, unfortunately, run the same OS. So what we end up having to do is fall back to the nuclear option, which is this download, install, and restart method, which uses an old MDM command. Basically, we try and send this out after hours to catch all the machines that haven't been updated, and that only basically gives them 60 seconds once the download and the pre-install's done, and it'll just reboot their machine. But with that, it keeps our cyber people happy because we can reach 95% patch success. So that's pretty good. It's just a shame that the DDM command isn't that successful yet. I mean, hopefully, maybe with macOS 26 it will be. Now the next section is we use scripting heavily, but we also use the Jamf Pro API quite heavily. So we use it for reporting. So I generate reports automatically, daily and monthly on the fleet and its compatibility and warranty information. We also use it for reporting on the new compliance stuff that's in Jamf Pro, so we can get it, because unfortunately there's nice UIs for a lot of the stuff in Jamf Pro, but there isn't any way to sort of generate or export a report yet. So we use the API and a bunch of smart groups to determine what percentage of the fleet are compliant and also which rules they're failing on, and basically just spit this out as a CSV file that we can then import into Excel or whatever to tidy up. And again, because there's no nice UI for the actual OS software update system in Jamf Pro, we're using the API there to basically find out the state of all the machines on, are they doing the update? Has the update failed? Is it in progress? And also get the error messages that it returns. So that's great, and hopefully one day there'll be a nice UI for that as well. And then the last thing we do is with scripting is, we use it for setting things like the computer name, assigning the site the machine is in Jamf Pro, because we at one point thought we were going to have delegated access to some of the faculties for some of their machines. That was never a requirement. We're still using sites, but we're phasing them out. And the last thing we're using the API for is to set the lapse password for the built-in admin account that gets created during a system setup. We had an issue where the bootstrap token wasn't getting escrowed before Jamf changed the pre-stage user's password at setup, and that was causing us trouble. So we actually turned the automatic feature of turning that on off, and then turned it on individually by machines using each Mac via the API. Now, since then, Jamf's changed some stuff, so we don't actually need to do that anymore. So for macOS 26, we'll be not using that. And as I mentioned before, we use auto package a lot. It's great for automatically uploading your packages, updating or creating the policies. It's also really good for creating smart groups. So if you've got custom requirements where you have to test for an individual version of a app on a machine, you can create a smart group with the variable for the version number in the workflow and auto package. But we also use it for creating smart groups to tell us whether the latest OS is on the machine or not. So we use the SOFA project, which is a project that records all the latest versions of macOS and iOS, and then we can basically just pull their JSON into a auto package recipe and then update our smart groups with the, if today 15.3 is the latest version, update the smart group for that. So that's come in really handy, because although Jamf has some of that stuff in their patch management title stuff, it gets confused about beta versions and stuff. So because we test beta versions at the same time we're testing the shipping version, so it will think that a beta version that's higher than the current shipping version is not actually up to date. So that throws your reports out. So that's why we use the SOFA stuff. And then we also use the API for doing bulk updates and removals. So it's really handy for updating warranty information if you're not in GSX, or you need to delete a large number of machines. Or what we do is we don't tend to delete machines unless we know they've been physically disposed of. What we do is we mark them as unmanaged, so they don't use a license, but the information like the 5-volt recovery key is kept. So someone rings up 6 months later saying, I can't get into this Mac, but it's no longer managed in Jamf Pro, at least we can give them the recovery key to get it back on their machine. Because the other problem is, no one ever tells IT when they've stopped using a machine, right? You sort of have to guess. So we do a lot of things. We have sort of a couple of hand-based rules where if the machine's more than 4 years old, out of warranty, and hasn't been online for 90 days, then we'll mark it as unmanaged. Labs are a little different because typically we know when we're rolling over a lab. We also use it for the API has been extended lately so you can remove the recovery lock via the API. So if you want to repurpose some lab machines somewhere else, you can just use the API to take a list of serial numbers and tell all those machines to remove the recovery lock. And likewise, if you want to rebuild a machine fast, the quick way to do it these days is the erase and all contents and settings. So that's called remote wipe in the MDM world. So we use that as well, and it's especially great on our test machines because instead of waiting for the whole OS to reinstall, you just basically wipe it to back to an unknown state, and you can re-enroll it automatically in the MDM, and off you go. So future plans. We have never tested setting the minimum OS to the latest major version and wiping labs to see if we can upgrade that way. So we'll be doing that in January for the first time. So hopefully that will go well. We have had the odd machine that we've got, out of the box, and the minimum OS thing has actually bricked the machine, and we've had to go in and DFU it, but it doesn't happen very often. Likely, we're going to look at this new platform single sign-on for shared machines. It looks like it's going to take Microsoft a while to actually implementate that, but once we do, then we'll stop binding to AD, and we'll also start using different pre-stages to dictate each group, each lab in Jamf Pro. So we've got another way to create smart groups and stuff based on that. And it's also going to be a major undertaking unbinding from AD, because we have 230 smart groups that currently require the information about are you bind and which OU you in. So that's going to take a mega script to change all the groups on the fly. So there'll be a lot of testing in that. Likewise, we'd like to use blueprints more. I mean, Apple's adding more and more stuff to DDM, I should say, that instead of old-fashioned config profiles. So it'll be nice to be able to start using more of those. I'm still not sure whether blueprints are as smart as maybe what Kanji does, where if the OS isn't the correct version, it won't send the key. I haven't looked into that yet. We're already using it for enrolling machines in betas. That's way nicer than having to manually log into the machine with a managed Apple ID to enroll it in a beta program. So that's really cool. And then software update deferrals. I've already enabled that for our macOS 15 fleet. So the day macOS 26 comes out, everybody won't be able to automatically upgrade until we've done our final testing. Likewise, they've announced some stuff in the API for Apple School Manager where we can get purchasing and warranty information from that. Hopefully that will be something that we can use to replace GSX eventually, because GSX is a rather annoying beast to continue using. We had a nasty problem where our manager ignored the email from Apple saying your GSX is about to expire, and so we completely lost GSX access for our warranty information for a month until we jumped through all the hoops to get re-enrolled. So you don't want to go through that if you can avoid it. And likewise, as I said before, we're going to remove sites at some point. We're also looking at getting a cloud PKI solution for integrating with Jamf Pro for Wi-Fi certificates for all the machines. I've had a brief test with Digi1 and Jamf Pro, and that looks quite promising, but whether we can afford that or not, we're not sure yet. And then just the last few things, a couple of wish lists I have from Apple. We'd love to see a remote wipe and auto advance with Wi-Fi. It works fine with Ethernet, and they have a feature similar to that for Wi-Fi for iPads, but not for Macs. There's also an issue that Apple stopped printing the MAC address for the Ethernet interface on the boxes for the iMacs and Mac Minis and stuff. So there's Apple School Manager's getting MAC addresses for Wi-Fi, but not Ethernet. So I hope Apple adds that at some point. As I mentioned before, the whole issue with VPP apps not automatically quitting to patch, I think that's being added to macOS 26, but I guess MDM vendors probably have to do something there as well. And then it'd be nice if there was a way for VPP apps that download and install content like GarageBand to be able to handle that through VPP. At the moment, we have to manually package all that stuff up, and that's a pain because you never know when Apple changes some of that stuff under the hood. And likewise for Jamf, add more apps to App Catalog, because that makes life a lot easier for us. Maintenance windows for both App Catalog and Jamf's patch system will be nice. Lovely, we could say, only install apps and labs between, 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. or something like that. We did try using a script to trigger the patch policies to do that at one point, but we couldn't do that for App Catalog, so we stopped doing that. Most of the time it's not a problem because, all the big apps like Adobe tend to come out at 3 in the morning, so the labs have got time to put the app updates on before anybody shows up, but, that is dicing with death if it happened at a different time. Likewise, the compliance benchmark stuff, we'd like to see an API for doing nicer reporting from that. And then finally, a full UI for software update. Now, I'd like to thank Daniel Woolcock, who's not here, but he helped me go through my slides and a few auditions. Thanks.